Let's take a look now at a very simplified system, which shares the characteristics of all larger and more complex systems. There's a boundary to it. If you think about a sports field, it's got its boundary marked out, and that boundary within which we play the game. You have inputs that enter the system's boundary, and you apply effort to those inputs to convert them into the desired outputs. When we think about the goal in the generic sense, we want to maximize the output with minimum effort on the inputs. That's the standard way of thinking about productivity. We're saying we want to be as productive as we possibly can. We don't want to expend excess effort. We don't want waste. We don't want to shout and scream. We don't want to do rework. We want our planning to be highly value-adding and our execution to be flawless. We want to have a smooth flow from end to end where everybody knows what they have to do and they work in sync like a well-rehearsed orchestra. The other positive attributes we want from our systems are agility, reliability, and quality. We want to be able to move with what's going on in our environment adeptly. We can't be rigid because everyone who has been around long enough knows that the world doesn't operate that way. Plans are for getting you into things. You have to get yourself out. We want to be reliable, so if we promise to deliver a product or service on a given date, we'll meet our commitments. Reliability enhances our reputation. Whoever depends on us for their inputs sees great value in us sticking to our promises. And we want quality. A simple way of thinking of quality is the degree to which rework is required. Quality checks should not be a completion step. Often, quality is about debugging the code or completing a snag list on a building. But what if you approach quality as a challenge to figure out how to minimize rework or even aspire to build a culture that gets it right the first time? Let's look at constraint accounting, which some people call throughput accounting, to understand the theory of constraints measures. We all recognize ROI. Let's examine return on investment through this formula from the constraint accounting framework. We've got this word called throughput. In the world of for-profit organizations, throughput is sales, being units times price, less the variable costs. Variable costs are the cost of goods sold, but it could also be the likes of commissions, royalties, and freight. A simple way of thinking about a variable cost is that it is a variable cost if I don't incur the cost when I don't do the sale. For example, no sale, no commission paid. Commission is therefore a variable cost. Some people call throughput gross margin, but the technical word used by the accountants is contribution margin. Sales less truly variable costs. Operating expense is labor plus overhead. So operating expense is labor, contractors, rent, IT, and the like. Think about operating expense by asking what it costs you to open the doors every day before you've made any sales. By definition, throughput minus the operating expense is your profit. If my sales less my variable cost is my throughput, then that amount less the operating expenses I have to pay when I open my doors is my profit. Investment is all the money trapped in the system, which includes, for example, my current assets, such as my raw materials, work in process, finished goods, debtors, and the like, as well as the fixed assets, such as plant and equipment and retained profits. To arrive at my investment, I can deduct my liabilities, which is the extent to which my creditors and banks are funding me. My return on investment is going to be my profit divided by my investment. To increase ROI, we want throughput to go up, while operating expense and investment either stay the same or go down. A key idea of the theory of constraints is that to maximize your return on investment, you must live in what Goldratt called the throughput world paradigm, and not cost world paradigm. The throughput world paradigm seeks to maximize throughput. The cost world paradigm prefers to reduce costs. In 99% of cases, there's always more throughput to go after than there is operating expense or investment to cut. Often, the amount of throughput to go after is essentially limitless. In contrast, the amount by which you can reduce operating expense or investment is limited if you want to sustain your organization's viability. So, what's the constraint? To grasp the basic idea, it's helpful to have some metaphors. The constraint is the system bottleneck. Simply put, it's whatever stops you from getting more of what it is you want. One of the key things to consider is your goal. What is it? Which mountain are you aiming to climb? The constraint is the system bottleneck, but it's not always that easy to tell. Look at this rank of cabs. Is the constraint the rate at which we can put people into the vehicles at the cab rank? If you've been at the cab rank at an airport, you've had that problem and stood in a long queue waiting your turn. So looking at this image, we might say that loading passengers is the constraint. But perhaps it's early in the morning or late in the afternoon and no flights are arriving. So they're just sitting there in the car park, patiently waiting for some demand. When thinking about the constraint, be careful, because the fact is that constraints govern the rate of value creation. Here's another way of thinking about constraints. If you can shorten the time in the pits in a race, you can get the car to finish the race quicker. But the flip side is that the pit crew has got capacity available. So what's their job while the car is racing around the track? You don't get the pit crew going, hey, we haven't got any work to do on our car. Why don't we go and change the tires on those cars in the parking lot and make a few bucks to help with the wages? Because, of course, you've got to be really ready if your driver comes into the pits. To win the race, it's not activity that delivers value, but rather being in a state of perpetual preparedness throughout the race. Should anything planned or unplanned transpire, you can act in an instant. Activity alone doesn't bring value. Being prepared for whatever might happen does, because a second saved in the pits is a second saved in the race. And we have to accept that things don't run like clockwork. This is what we'll consider in the next part.